Is the world sliding into a new age of protectionism? In this episode, we speak with Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, former WTO ambassador and leading trade strategist, about what Trump's latest tariffs signal for global trade and what it means for countries like Pakistan. From the hidden costs of protectionism to bold ideas for export-led growth, we explore how trade can still be a powerful engine of transformation if we get the policies right. Join us on this week's edition of the Flywheel Economics podcast. Welcome to the Flywheel Economics podcast. Flywheel Economics is a concept that proposes true, sustainable economic growth by viewing economies as ecosystems. I'm your host, Richard O.
And I'm your co-host, Favour Ogbadu. Together, let's explore a more sustainable and powerful way to view innovation, investment, and economic policymaking.
Favour, today's episode, we are talking trade. And about time too, as far as I'm concerned, because I'm a very strong believer in its ability and its potential to transform. How are you on trade? What's your thinking?
You know what they say, there are gains from trade. And yes, I don't think there's a better time to talk about it. I'm pretty sure I've had the word tariffs this year alone, more than I've ever had it in my entire life. So I think it's really a major discussion, and I'm glad we can jump on it here on the podcast.
Well, yeah, and particularly Trump has done his bit to ensure that tariffs go viral this year. And I'm sure you must have seen your fair share of American workers who are in factories stitching, sweatshops and things like that. The sort of the Chinese originated memes that have come out mocking, I guess, America's new policy of protectionism. It's interesting because I'm not sure that we are in a new world where social media is now being used in a way which to mock protectionism, and it's originating from China and countries that have done so well from free trade over the years, and it's really putting it in perspective. So. Yeah, I mean, what's your thinking? I mean, how have you seen it come out on social media?
Yes, I think as a consumer, there's a way that the narrative comes at you, and it's like, oh, it's true, it makes sense. Well, especially when things are so expensive, you come to the conclusion that, oh, maybe it would be better if we just focus on our domestic market. Maybe it would be better if we stop all the imports and the exports and just invest in ourselves, because things are so expensive. Why should we be buying from other countries? We're not seeing the benefits. But it comes to a point where yes, there's an importance of strengthening our domestic markets, but the realization is that there are gains from trade, and tariffs and stopping international trade is not the panacea that many people are presenting it to be. It's not, it's just one side of the coin, one side of the story. It's not, oh, if we stop international trade, everything is going to be cheap. We're going to live in prosperity. So I think the narrative is very essential, and understanding the whole picture is like, okay, it's not just shutting down international trade. There's really more to it.
Yeah. And one of the things with trade that frustrates me is it's so often seen through ideology, and it's so often seen as a matter of the heart rather than the head. So many people, and we talk about this in our interview with Dr. Manzoor later, so many people see it as a point of patriotism. The idea that, and this is what Trump is appealing to a lot, right? When he goes out to the American public, he's like, you know, these companies in China, these companies elsewhere in the world are stealing our jobs. They're stealing good American jobs. They're the reason you're poor. They're the reason you're suffering. And if I take my bold measures, I'm going to be able to help bring that back for the American people. And that's not very different to the arguments that have been used for decades and decades and decades in developing countries around the world, where the politicians speak to their people and they say the reason you're poor is because we have these imports that are coming in cheap, and the only thing we need to do is to protect ourselves from these imports, and then suddenly growth, prosperity will come our way. And look, this is the trade arguments at the argument against trade at its most basic, at its most simplistic. It appeals to something it appeals to our fears, and it appeals to the things which the very base instincts of humans. Like we're all to some degree motivated by fear, and when we're motivated by fear, the politicians that make those arguments can make really compelling cases. Now, because I know there's a lot of strong feeling on trade, particularly from those in government circles, particularly from those who studied economics or study politics or study law or things like that, that people tend to have strongly held views, and it's very difficult to nudge them one way or another. So I wouldn't want to pretend that it's only those fear-based arguments, which is why people support protectionism, because there are much more intellectualized arguments why protectionism would be a viable route, right? So you've got the whole, have you heard of infant industry arguments, Faber?
I can't say I have.
So infant industry arguments tend to be the sort of the theoretical ones which have the most strong base, I guess, in policy circles, right? So the argument is this: when you're going into a new area, suppose you're a developing country and you haven't got that industrial base, you may need to protect your country from imports so that you can build that industrial base. And once you get to a certain size, you will then reduce the tariffs that are protecting you and allow your sectors to compete. But your sectors aren't ready to compete. That's the argument. You say, well, look, we're too fragile, we're too weak, we can't compete. So we're going to just give ourselves that little space, that little protection, and we'll grow. And once we grow, we'll then open up and we'll compete, and it will be fair. Now, the challenge with that is that it rarely works, because what tends to happen is the protectionism happens, but there's never really a viable weakening of those tariffs. So it's the industries grow, but they tend to then, to a certain extent, but they tend to not be very productive or competitive because they don't need to be, because they're being protected. And because of that, they tend to lobby politicians to say, no, don't reduce the tariffs. We're fine. And so that keeps countries stuck, because they're never going to be at a position where they can export. And we'll go into this a bit later, but I've visited textile factories in Kano where, to be honest, it's been quite depressing, right? This is a sector in Nigeria that's been heavily protected over the years, even import bans on textiles, even though we know you get a lot of imported foreign produced textiles in the country. It's like almost impossible to stop. But when you go around the textile factories, one of the most striking things I saw was, this company was surviving. I mean, maybe it had several hundred machines for people to be sewing garments. I think it was doing two things at the time I visited it. One was it was making very low quality uniforms for NYSC, which is the National Youth Service scheme in Nigeria. And I looked at that and I thought, goodness me, I wouldn't want to be the ones wearing those. Secondly, so that was effectively a government contract, right? That was keeping it going. Secondly, it was making replica football shirts. So pirated football shirts, basically. So something it had no license to do that would be sold cheaply at the markets or whatever. And I thought this was a sector that was supposed to be the future of Nigeria. And it's been reduced to a fairly lousy government contract and making something it has no intellectual property to do. Is like a fake football shirts. And you think, what hope can you take from that industry? On the other hand, I visited a textiles place in Lagos, and it was doing, I won't say the brand, but it was doing children's clothes. It was a local brand. It was doing high-end children's clothes, and it was doing very well. And there was a lot more dynamism. They were focusing on the design rather than that's where they were adding value. They imported lots of their raw materials and focused on the higher value stuff, and they were selling it at a premium price, and it was doing well. So that business was actually relying on imports in order to then make its product, add value, and then trade it. So anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying a lot of the time with the infant industry arguments, you end up with those textile industry like I saw up in Kanu, where, and not to say, by the way, don't get this wrong. There was many places in Kanu I went to where I saw some very positive vibrancy, but it was just this particular textile company I visited did not give me hope. So that's often what infant industry does, right? It says, don't worry, we'll protect you. You don't have to compete. You don't have to stress yourselves. Just be happy where you are. And it's like anyone, right? Imagine a parent doing that to a child. If they just say, look, you know what? Don't stress yourself. Just be that, it doesn't matter. Look, we're always going to pick up the bill for you. That's nice. That's really nice. But to some degree, it can take away that fire, that desire to compete and whatever. And one thing I'll say particularly about Nigeria is Nigerians do well. Whenever they go anywhere in the world, they thrive. They don't just survive, they thrive. And yet back home in Nigeria, things seem to be such a way that the mentality is our businesses need to just survive. And So, and don't get me wrong, I'm not by any means trying to underappreciate how difficult it is to run a business in Nigeria, because it is. It's really difficult. But what I would say is that competition that comes through trade can bring out the best in countries and can bring out the best in sectors. Any thoughts from you, Faber?
Well, as someone who has worn the NYSC uniform, I can't say I don't know what you're talking about. But just to your point again about politicians and policies speaking to the fear in people as a consumer, just as I said in the beginning, it's something I can relate to, because when they come out and tell you, oh, it's a company in China taking away all our jobs, and then you see even the expenses of things, it's hard not to relate. But I think it's really a matter of, okay, looking down at what exactly is going on, what exactly are the implications when this trade doesn't occur, and what are the implications when they do occur. So it's a matter of, as much as those emotions are there, as much as what we can see with our eyes and the emotions that are being played to in media, we have to sit down by ourselves and say, okay, what does the evidence say? And frankly speaking, a lot of times we don't see the evidence as it is. We don't see what experts are saying as it is. We don't see it translated into mainstream media. And then we have a lot of people running around with ideals, just as you said, more a matter of the heart than of the mind.
Yeah. And look, again, as I'm saying, I'm not trying to minimize those people who are coming in with import substitution ideas. There is, an intelligent basis for that, right? I mean, Heijun Chang in particular, an old professor of mine, writes very eloquently about why that would be a viable strategy. It's no coincidence that he's from South Korea, and South Korea is one of the few countries that has had success with that type of route of development. Big companies like Samsung started off as these big monopolies in their country, right? Think sort of a bit like Dangote's kind of scale, right? They were the big companies in their country. And through those big companies, they were able to get development and they were able to compete globally. So if he's writing on this, it's because he's had first-hand experience living in a country where that model has been viable. And he looks back in history and he looks at the UK, the US, other countries, and he tries to say, look, these countries are hypocrites. They're saying to you, open your markets. And yet when they went through their development, they didn't open their markets all the time. And there is some evidence around that being the case in different parts. It's disputable exactly how much of the economic transformation was caused by the protectionism versus the free trade periods and all the rest. And most countries have oscillated between the two from different time periods. But one thing I would say is I feel like the most destructive thing in all of this is keeping trade policy as something in the heart rather than in the head. Because I think what you have to do is take each country by its own merits, and you have to do a bit like what I did in Kanu, where you go in, you look at the companies which are there and you think, is this healthy? Is this vibrant? Is this something which is going to help the country going forward? Is this the future? And if you look at it and you think no, then I think you have to question whether pursuing that same route that you've been pursuing for 30, 40, 50 years, if not longer, is the right approach for trying to get economic transformation. And you don't make it about the heart, you make it about the head, and you make it about a much more practical thing. Anyway, that's a way of a bit of a philosophical introduction, I guess, on ideology versus pragmatism. Let's hear from our guest today, Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, and hear what he has to say. Can you give us a bit of background, Favor, on him?
Yes, of course. So today we sit down with Dr. Manzoor Ahmad. He's the former ambassador to the World Trade Organization from Pakistan, and he's one of Pakistan's leading trade policy thinkers. And it was really useful to hear him speak out of his wealth of experience about where Pakistan currently stands in its own trade reforms and how it can get better.
Great. Well, let's hear what he has to say.
Hello, Dr. Manzoor. It's really nice meeting you. So can you start off today by introducing yourself to our listeners and tell us a bit more about your background, your work at the World Trade Organization, and what drew you into trade policy?
Okay, I worked originally for the government of Pakistan. I was working in the Federal Board of Revenue and in the Customs Department. And in fact, from 2002, I was head of Pakistan's customs. And then I landed a job representing the government of Pakistan as Pakistan's ambassador to the World Trade Organization. There I stayed for 6 years, 2002, 2008. And then afterwards, I joined Food and Agriculture Organization as their director and representative to the United Nations. And since then, after coming back from Switzerland, I do various assignments, but almost all related to trade issues. Currently, I'm on Prime Minister's team on 2 or 3 committees. One is about the overall looking at our trade and tariff policies. And I'm just coming from that meeting. Then there's another 2 committees what the U.S. President Trump has imposed all these tariffs, and we are our own response how we should do it, and I'm part of those committees as well.
Thank you, Dr. Manzoor. What do you think is the most misunderstood aspect of trade in Pakistan's policy and political discourse?
I think the most misunderstood aspect is that people think that if we open our trade, our industry will not be able to compete, and whatever industry that we have will also close down. That's one aspect. The other thing is they think that since we are short on foreign exchange, we would not have the money, and they refer to 2 or 3 previous episodes when we had tried to open up and then we ran into balance of payment problems. And so we had to shut down. And they think that we should do it rather slowly. But behind the scenes, there are certain lobbies who promote this version.
Thank you very much. And just staying on that train of thought, because we had a Sialkot episode where we explored the trade that goes on. Sialkot is known globally as one of the biggest exporters of football. So we explored how a self-sustaining export ecosystem emerged. But why haven't we seen similar flywheels in other parts of Pakistan's economy?
You see, Sialkot is a unique city in Pakistan because in other cities, there are both interest imports as well as exports. And Sialkot is mostly about exports. I mean, they import for their exports, but they are not, they don't have to protect their local industry against imports, etc. And since they are, their thinking is this, that, okay, if we can export to Germany and if we can export things to rest of the world, then we can compete here. So they are more, I should say, open-minded about trade. And they think that if the trade, I was there in Sialkot a few years ago when Pakistan was thinking of opening trade, normalizing trade with India. And I went to all cities around the country. And wherever I went, I would meet some people who would support or normalizing trade, but there were lots of people who would say, oh, we'll be destroyed because India is such a big economy and there's economies of scale, etc. And they subsidize, and they had all sorts of those perceptions. Sialkot was one city. They said, oh, it would be great. We get a big market there in India. And they also said, we can have this, we make something and they make something. And together we can, for example, hockey stick. We make good hockey sticks and they make good balls to play with. And, all these things, they gave me several examples which can be used which can be used to their advantage.
So why are exports so critical, not just for foreign exchange, but for productivity, innovation, long-term economic transformation?
You see, if you look at around the world, the countries that were able to, the top of the thing I list is reduction of poverty, because Pakistan's poverty rates are very high. And if, we look at Vietnam, they had about 80% poverty rate. And now with all their opening up and trade, I think it's now 1 or 2%, or even less than that. They've been able to get rid of it. But it's just not, you look at any country, the poorer the country, the most protectionist it is. And the other thing is, we are always begging our neighbors and IMF for this thing. It's because we don't have enough exports. We don't have, we need to pay for our imports. But the exports is the only way to pay that. I mean, we have these remittances, but that's only part of the solution. Actual solution is exports. But this is just two things. But, if you want your factories to be running, our industrial activity has been, even now when everything is stabilizing, every month we see the figures of industrial growth. It's actually shrinking. It's not going up. And somehow people feel that it's because we are allowing too many things in. But those things come tax-free through smuggling, etc. This because of very high taxes at the port, it's more profitable for smugglers to get into that business. And we don't take that into account. And also the other thing is about exemptions. Because of very high tariffs, we have to give exemptions to very powerful lobbies. Just last week, Fareed Zakaria saying that once President Trump puts all these high tariffs, then there's a flood of exemptions. And what he calls it as orgy of corruption. So it's the same thing here. We collect 1,100 billion in import tariffs, the customs duty, and we give 550 billion in kind of exemptions. So, you can see, I mean, the powerful people get those, other people are left out. But the worst thing, I think, is that, it doesn't look after our poor people, because they're whatever they earn. I mean, if they earn, say, 2,000 rupees a day, they get the edible oil, they get all these things. And these are mostly imported. So they pay a disproportionate part of the earning. For a rich man, earning 10 million, it doesn't matter, getting a tin of edible oil. It's hardly any. But for them, it's half a day's salary. It's just one product. And also, it's for poor's, shoes, clothing, all these things.
You've just spoken to us about the importance of exports. So if you look over the past few decades in Pakistan, what have been the opportunity costs of not prioritizing export-led growth more systematically?
Well, one has been that we got left out. I mean, if you look at only 30 years ago, our per capita income or any of the economic indicators that you see were better than our peer countries. And maybe I give you another statistics that I think by the late by 60s, Pakistan, although our exports are low, but we had more exports than Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, etc. These countries combined. And now we are not even a fraction of any of these countries. So, and you look at those countries, we could have been there instead of where we are.
Okay. And could you explain what anti-export bias means in Pakistan's context, and how has it affected Pakistan's economic choices?
You see, it's well known that any taxes that you put, import duties, is a kind of a tax on exports. So that's because we have the highest taxes. And so that means that, we have the highest anti-export bias. But just to explain to you by an example, I think it's more clear. Say we import air conditioner, all right? So we allow the components and raw materials at lower duty. And then we protect the final product through very high tariffs. So it's very, it's more profitable for our assemblers and our manufacturers to import lots of these components, and because it's hardly in duty, and then make these air conditions, but not export, because the domestic market provides them far more profit than if they were to export. Maybe they get 4-5% profit. Here, I think there's some statistics that they make something, because of high tariffs, they make 40% profit. So whichever industry originally starts with that we will export so much, but they've not done anything so far. I mean, all these industries who promised all that.
So it constrains them to focus on the local
market, yes.
Because it's more profitable than if they were to export.
Yes.
And presumably it also allows more inefficiencies to be built in.
Yes, that's another thing. So because they're highly protected from imports, so they can produce shoddy products, low quality products, and sell them in the market, because, no import can come in. And so they can sell anything they make. So the quality is, if they were to export, they would have to compete with many other countries on quality, cost, and everything. But because of that, quality stays low.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. So what kinds of policies or behaviors have reinforced this bias over time, and who benefits from keeping it that way?
I mean, you see, kind of two or three things. I mean, let me explain that what happened internationally and where we didn't. From 90s, what they call hyper-globalization, it was a period when containerization was an internet, etc. So this production was being spread over. I mean, the global value chain. So most of the trade was moving in that global value chains. But Pakistan could not, because it had high duties. So thing cannot come and go, because as a part of global value chain, something comes in, and for example, this mobile phone, somebody puts a screen, another country something else. And for any product, whether it's a teacup, you make something, and then put somebody puts some color, things like that. And we just couldn't. I mean, if you look at our competitors like Malaysia and Vietnam, their imported component will be something more than 40% of their exported components. But in our case, it will be less than 5%. That means that our product will be relatively lower quality, because you have to use the local. You're not free to use the best product. You have to use the local product. So maybe sometimes you make a very expensive, make an expensive car. And because for years we would ask them to use the local tire, there was only one local tire industry. And so, even domestically, anybody buys a new car, the first thing they do is go and change the tires. So, but outside, nobody is going to trust if they find some problem with this thing. So this forcing the industry to just procure locally, I think was one of the biggest problems.
Building on that, looking at the automobile sector, it's often cited as an example of excessive protection.
Yeah.
And you just gave a good example there. What has that protection actually achieved or failed to achieve?
Yeah. I can give you many examples of development countries. Maybe I do. You look at, say, Thailand, you look at Indonesia, all these countries, after this, they were all dependent on textile clothing. And as they improved up the ladder, the next was auto parts, and the next was automobiles. And we tried over the last so many years that we should have a completely 100% homemade car, and what we call deletion policies, etc. It's considered very patriotic deletion policy. As a result, over the last many, many years that we had auto industry, one of the earliest, 50s, we already had it. And now it's 2025, we've not exported a single car. There was recently, they said, okay, they exported about a dozen cars to Japan, but I think that was, I don't think that's real export. I mean, so if you, 15 years ago, say, Morocco had zero exports of cars. Now, I think it's 15 billion or something like that. I give you an example of Indonesia, because I was then in Geneva and discussing this thing with the Indonesian ambassador. And they were producing something like 200,000 cars. We were producing 200,000 cars. Then they modernized their policies. Instead of deletion and import substitution, etc., they moved towards export-led growth. Now they produce more than 1 million cars. More than half are exported. So their export is, I don't know, 5-7 billion. I don't take my word on the numbers because it changes. But we have zero exports, and we not even able to meet our own needs. And they are not only meeting because the economies of scale went up.
So do you see it as harmful that protectionism is often conflated with patriotism?
Yes. Oh, yes. This is because this was, in fact, when developing countries got free and became independent, this was a big thing, that we should be able to produce our own things and we should protect this nascent industry. And that was every developing country. But then some countries, we realized very early on, for example, like Taiwan, so, this is not working. And they had no exports. So they moved, and then South Korea moved, and then Turkey moved, and China, and every single country that moved from that protectionism to open competition really went up like this. There were countries like India and Pakistan, which were stuck for a long time. I think in 91, when when we both went to IMF to get some loan, and IMF asked both of us, India and Pakistan, to open up our economy, and India started doing it, and then they also committed we'll not go back to IMF, and they kept on those policies for about 7-8 years. We did the same thing in Pakistan till about 2002, and then we thought that we had done enough, so we stopped. And after once we did those liberalization, our exports were growing by about 14%. In fact, recently the Ministry of Commerce itself did a study to see how our opening up has related to exports. And they found that when in the 80s we were increasing tariff rates, our exports were coming down. And then in the 90s we liberalized, and our exports are going up by 12%. And since 2003, we have done nothing, and we have been losing our global trade share of exports by 1.5% every year. Other countries have been gaining. Pakistan has been losing its trade share. Yeah.
So if actually the more effective route, if you want to be patriotic, is to pursue policies that enable you to compete, how can trade economists or trade advocates like yourself change this narrative that it's not just about protectionism being one and the same as patriotism, but it's there are different ways in which you can achieve that patriotism?
Yes, unfortunately, some rent-seeking industries or people maybe who are into smuggling, etc., they have a much bigger voice through newspapers, and they create scare. Oh, Pakistan going to cut the tariff rates, and they're flooded. They'll be flooded. Now even what's happening when China has a problem with it, and they think that China is going to flood everything in Pakistan, and so there's this thing, this perception. And the consumers, on the other hand, have no lobby here. So it's becoming difficult, but slowly and gradually, we're making a difference. Now, I think our Prime Minister is committed. Once he heard us a few times, now the rest of the cabinet is coming around. So we are coming around. It's making a difference, but it took a long time.
So you painted a picture of the effect it has had on what protectionism has had on Pakistan as a whole, but what has been the cost to consumers and innovation, and what might a smarter approach look like?
Yes. Well, cost to the consumer is this, that we have low quality cars or autos at twice the international price. So this is also, then the other cost to the consumer is that since our, I should say, engine has not been able to, although they import these kits, etc., but say our average car does about 13, 14 kilometers to a liter. And same engine made elsewhere, say in Thailand or maybe in Japan, does about 20 kilometers. And we spend 30% of our imports consist of petroleum products, and 80% of that is for transportation. So if we had more efficient transportation, more efficient means, that consumption is higher, that would come down quite substantially. That bill on import of oil would have come down quite substantially. And that is just one part of it. But our cities are now, in winter especially, they get big blanket of smog. And for 4 or 5 years, no, 4 or 5 months in a year, economic activity comes down very substantially. I think the World Bank calculated something like 6% of our GDP or something. So because the population has increased, there are more cars now, there's more this smoke plus all those environmental hazards, and it's surely affecting our health sector, and our costs there are also. So it's not just one thing. It's one thing to another, leading to another, to another, to another. So these are the costs that we are bearing.
Textiles dominate Pakistan's export basket.
Yeah.
What other sectors do you think have real potential, and what would it take to unlock them?
You see, if you look at any other country, Turkey, for example, Pakistan, were doing the same thing. We both had 3 billion export. We had 3 billion export in 1980. And then they level the playing field, textile vis-a-vis others, because they had to bring down their tariffs to the same level as EU because they wanted to become a part of customs union. And that provided other industries to come up. Now in Pakistan, there's a special, what you call, statutory regulatory order, SRO. This gives textile industry has everything for free. I mean, they import their machinery is free. They import their raw materials, their components, everything is free. But this same thing doesn't apply for engineering goods or any other industry. Now, globally, 50% of exports are on average engineering goods. Pakistan is less than 5%. So we could quite easily do that engineering, like Sialkot does this light engineering. And they can come up with the best surgical instrument. Why not the rest of the country? So we can really, if the level playing field, if we are not spending all our subsidies and everything on textile, doing something else, and the other things like pharmaceuticals or engineering goods, they're far more value added. You send a full truck of textile, and in fact, if you send a full truck of engineering components, you get at least 100 times more, maybe at least 10 times more value for that.
Now, just to pivot, can trade liberalization itself drive innovation, or does it need to be paired with deeper reforms like infrastructure, R&D, or skills?
Yes, I mean, these other things are helpful. I mean, if we have the infrastructure, if you can quickly get the goods to the port, and if there's more educated labor, they can produce better quality goods, all those things go. But what other countries' experience has been that once they get into exports, then these other things automatically pick up. Earlier, we were talking about Sialkot. Now, those businessmen, they put up their own airport, So where there's some export industry or export goods, there the payment to the labor is higher for export products than it is for domestic. And they can give better education to their children than others. And they have better health facility, etc. So these exports can drive many other sectors. They can bring up those. But everything, once you have the money, then other things also improve.
Donald Trump has announced to
29%, 29.5% tariff on Pakistani imports. How seriously should we take that? And what might the implications be?
Well, for the time being, as you know, there's a pause to that decision. So we just, I think it's 10% across board, but the rest is pause. Obviously, if that Pakistan mostly flourishes on a low price goods. So if there's such high tariff, that means people in the export market they'll cut down their buying. I mean, they buy lesser towels and bed sheet and clothing, etc. So that's one thing. That will come down. The other problem is that it's already happening. There are exemptions for some. So, for example, Israel or maybe Vietnam offered that we can bring down all our tariffs, you bring down yours, 0. And they're in a better position to do it because they already have a free trade agreement and they don't depend too much on import taxes and, custom duties, etc. We cannot offer the same thing. So if our competitors get, much more advantageous tariff treatment, that would hurt our exports. And also the U.S., the indication are that they're asking that you should bring down trade deficit by buying more from us. Okay, that's all right if they're competitive. But if their cotton is more expensive compared to Brazil and we end up spending far more money, we can't afford it. And that's applies to many other products.
Do you think we are entering a new global era of protectionism? And what risk does that beggar thy neighbor approach pose for countries like Pakistan?
Well, that is a general feeling. For maybe one or two reasons that from 1930 onwards, when the U.S. at that time put very high taxes, import duties under the Smoot-Hawley legislation on 20,000 products, and the trade had really gone down. But then the U.S. realized and reversed that decision, and quickly. But since then, there might have been, little instances on one thing or another, but overall, such a thing has not happened. So this is the first time it's happening. Fortunately, so far, other countries are committing publicly that they are not going to do this treatment with beggar thy neighbor. But future is very difficult. I mean, if it's like China and US. For most countries, the big trade war is between them. For most countries, China is the biggest import from sourcing, and US is the most. But then if they're kind of asked to pick between one and two, that puts the country in very, very difficult situation. Well, I hope that this is a temporary phenomena. This will, I think, subside. But you never know. Sometimes some tariffs are put in place and then they stay there. I mean, at one time, I think there was dispute on this chickens or something with Europe and this thing. And then some tariffs are put in place. And till now, they're there. So it changed. And then there was this small trucks. And U.S. put some tariffs on that, and it's still there. Sometimes these decisions they leave their remnants for a long time, and the change, and also the trust, because for too long, for almost 70, 80 years, countries were thinking that there's only one way, and that is the tariffs will keep going down. Perhaps there was a change coming in the last 10, 15 years. But that was mostly that countries were integrating regionally. So they were bringing down their tariffs regionally, but not for the those who were outside. And I don't know. How is that going to affect? But that has been the trend so far.
And in this shifting global landscape, how can Pakistan stay competitive and avoid being left behind?
First, it should realize that all this discussion about tariffs is that how much these tariffs will hurt the global economy and the country itself, even the U.S. Almost, economists are normally they don't agree on anything. But one thing I've not really heard is one serious economist praising Trump's, even Republican, etc., to their tariff policy. So Pakistan should realize that tariffs is not a good thing. So in order to cope with it, Pakistan should do its own reforms. And let me give one example. When it's from history, when in Chile in 1973 or something, I think Pinochet took over. It was a military coup. And many countries said, we're not going to trade with Chile because it was considered a bad thing. And he said, okay, they're not trading. I'll bring down my tariffs. I mean, their tariffs used to be very high. And he said, across the board, 10%. And, industry was very upset because they were like Pakistan, some were used to very high this thing. And it worked so well. Now, Chile is the most prosperous country in Latin America. It's a member of OECD, etc. So sometimes these are opportunities to bring down your own reforms, expedite your own reforms.
I think I agree. So how optimistic are you that Pakistan can still build a vibrant, productive economy through a more strategic trade agenda?
It's not been easy. It's not been easy to convince people. And the more problems they have, the more it is, it's like sometimes I see it's in terms of religion. If you get some earthquake or something, people think it's because of you're committing some sins and they become more religious. It's the same thing here. The people have a feeling that we are too open and that's why we're getting into this problem. But hopefully there's a realization, in case of Pakistan at least, our top policymakers are realizing that our current policy is not the right way to go forward. And there's a consensus being built around it that we need to reform. The discussion is about how ambitious it should be. Should we do all this in 3 years, 5 years, 7 years? So that's being discussed, but I think they'll find a way around it. And so I'm becoming more optimistic.
And just zooming out, how do you see the future of global trade evolving over the next decade? Is this going to be, are we going to go back to cooperation or is this fragmentation going to continue?
I think maybe in case of US, because you look at their long history and they go through this isolation and then they come back and then the isolation, etc. So I don't know, maybe US withdraws to itself as done in the past. But that will give China to further expand. And, the world is so globally integrated that it will, I don't know, it looks very difficult. It looks very difficult that it could undo that. And I think, and also it's, for example, rare earths. There's things which are only available in one, for example, palm oil. It's only available in those. So there's, you have to stay integrated. And maybe there would be something, but otherwise, give you an example. For example, when EU was becoming EU, and I was then in Brussels there were other countries worried that EU will become a fortress. It would only be trading within. And we didn't see that. I mean, they were still trading with all the world, etc. So I'm hopeful than being dismissive about it.
I wonder if there's similarities with when we went through the global financial crisis. All economists started to pick up their Keynesian textbooks again, and I wonder if there's an equivalent here where if we start going through a period of trade protectionism, that economists will start and policymakers will start rediscovering the importance of trade.
Yes, and that's what I was saying, that there was nothing parallel, but there was that 1930s when the trade went down, not only in the US, although the world was much less integrated, but across all countries, employment went down, everything. And then they quickly, within 4 years, they tried to reverse it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Manzoor, for your time. Thank you.
Well, that was Dr. Manzoor. Favour, what did you think? Any reflections from you?
Yes, I thought it was quite interesting just to learn about Pakistan's, should I say, aversion to international trade, and understanding the mindset behind it, basically that fear of domestic industries will not be able to compete with international goods if the market is open and everything. And then it was really nice going back to Sialkot concerning how open-minded they are, because when we had our Sialkot episode, that was a recurring question for us. Why does Sialkot stand out so much? And then we're able to get more glimpse that they have, when it comes to trade, they are more open-minded, which is very, very different from the larger part of Pakistan. And then it was really eye-opening to understand the disadvantages of not trading, and the fact that this proportionately affects people with lower income. And that was really, it opens your mind to understand that the decisions that policymakers take has far-reaching effect behind the initial. We have to think of everybody, because when we discuss trade, there's fairness and there's equity that has to come into play. And understanding the fact that it is people from lower income that are more affected when it comes to international trade, when it doesn't happen. And I think also learning about the automobile industry was also another major key takeaway for me. The fact that he said a lot of times when people get their cars, the first thing they do is go and change the tires. And the potential, just hearing him talk, you understand that Pakistan has large potential, but somehow it's not able to fully come up to that potential because of the tariffs and then the trade restrictions. And staying on tariffs, it was now another aspect to see that the people that benefits the most are smugglers, because they stand the chance of saying, okay, I'm going to smuggle goods, I'm not going to pay tax. That is money that the Pakistani government is missing out on, all because of the pressure that they place on international trade. And I thought those were really major key takeaways, and really gave insight into just how it works in Pakistan. So those were just some of my major key takeaways. How about you, Richard?
Well, those are some great reflections, Favor. I think as you were talking, I was sort of reminded about the story closer to home for you, Favor. The idea, we spoke earlier in the introduction about textiles in Nigeria and how import bans, high tariffs, all the rest of that had tried to protect an industry that in large parts was dying. And I think another symptom of a dying local industry is when you find that people can carry stuff in their suitcases back from another country and it still be profitable for them to sell the stuff they've carried in their suitcases. And you see that, I used to see that all the time in Nigeria, right? So maybe a work colleague travels to the UK or the US, they fill a suitcase full of brand new clothing, they bring it back and they sell, and they make money from doing that. You shouldn't be able to make money by carrying clothes in a suitcase, and that tells you something has gone wrong with your markets, because the international trade is about being able to export at volumes. It's about able to have big shipping containers. That is a far more cost-effective way of transporting goods than in suitcases. So if suitcases are being used on British Airways flights, you know that something has gone wrong with your market, and that there is something artificial that's stopping people from being able to get that. So I think there's just some of the sort of the informal type indicators that you can see when markets aren't working the way they should. Whilst I'm on the topic of Nigeria, I wanted to bring another example. And this is the controversial one, because it means that I'm having a little bit of a swipe at one of your national treasures, Aliko Dangote. Now, the cement industry has long been heralded by Nigerian politicians as a success for the country. And Aliko Dangote has been the man that they see as driving that success, because Nigeria has gone from a position where domestic production was very low to a position where Dangote produces the biggest manufacturing cement plant in Africa, right? And I remember when President Goodluck Jonathan was president, he was given a tour around the newly opened Dangote cement plant, and Dangote's giving him the tour personally himself, and he's seeing that. And Jonathan makes a remark at the time along the lines of, wow, this is truly wonderful. If only I had a few more business people like yourself, Dangote, then we wouldn't have problems in this country. And that, in a way, to me at least, sums up the challenge that more open traders, a more open trade policy mindset has to compete with, because it's as the analogy goes, it's the bird in the hand versus two in the bush. So when President Jonathan gets the tour of Dangote's cement plant, he's seeing something tangible. He's seeing something on ground. He sees the jobs that are created in front of him. He sees the production that's taking place, and he can go, wow, this is progress. And everyone who sees the news reports can look at that and say, this is progress. We're doing well. This is what the direction we should be going in. The challenge is you don't see the two birds in the bush. The two birds that you could have had you gone a slightly different direction. And I don't mean to take this away from the effort that Dangote and his company would have done to make that. It's no easy accomplishment in a very difficult business environment. But largely the cement industry as a whole is dominated by three major companies in Nigeria. It's largely viewed as not a competitive market. And as a consequence of that, it's had a lot of trade protection over the years. So cement is not a product that lends itself well to trade, but it has had a lot of restrictions in terms of imports and things over the years as well. If I just look at sort of just comparing prices now as of early 2025 across Africa of a 50 kg bag of cement, where do you, of these countries, Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, South Africa, Egypt, and Ethiopia, where do you think Nigeria will stand in terms of from cheapest to most expensive bag of 50 kilograms of cement?
I can't believe you're putting me on the spot, but if I could just guess, I'm going to say right in the middle, number 3.
Number 3. So Nigeria is number 2 in terms of the most expensive. So it's just after Ghana. So Nigeria, say approximately US dollar price per bag of cement is about $6.5 per bag. Sorry, Ghana is $6.5 per bag. Nigeria is just slightly behind that at $6.3 US dollars per bag. If we look at the other side, Ethiopia, where Dangote produced cement, because of course Dangote is exporting cement across the country, it's invested in other African countries as well. So cement goes there for $3, 3.8 US dollars in Ethiopia. You can also, in Egypt, it's $3 per barrel. But for barrel, I'm talking oil. See, this is what Nigeria does. You think in terms of barrels of oil. $3 per 50 kg bag of cement. South Africa, 4.8 US dollars. And Kenya, 5.8. So Nigeria is at the high end in terms of price. And that's despite having had these policies of protectionism and having the biggest cement producing plant in Africa and all the rest of it. The challenge is if you don't have that competitive pressure, it's very difficult to bring down prices. And it would be interesting to hear from the cement companies why they can sell a bag of cement for $3 in Egypt or $3.8 in Ethiopia, and the same companies that sell it for $3.8 in Ethiopia sell it for twice the amount in their home country. And, they may say, well, Nigeria's, the roads are not good, the electricity is not, there could be a host of reasons, but we can't also ignore that these markets are not competitive. And what trade does is it opens you up to a global competitiveness. There's nowhere you can hide. You can't say, right, well, I'm not going to, I don't need to make these efficiencies because no one's going to compete, because somewhere, some country, there will be someone who can compete with you. Why does that matter? Is it just the fact that, family, friends, colleagues will be paying more for a bag of cement? You've got to think about the jobs that have been lost because of that. So we do an affordable housing mini-series, and one of the things that we look at is the price of construction in a country. Now, if your bag of cement is twice the amount of a bag of cement in another part of the continent, then conceivably you could be, there could be almost half the amount of houses built for the same amount of money, right? In terms of, if cement is one of the main inputs, which it is into a lot of housing, then you could be producing, it could cost you a lot more to produce those houses. And that's not just meaning you've got fewer houses, it also means you're creating fewer construction industry jobs. So for the few hundred of jobs, or maybe even if we include indirect jobs, maybe 1,000 or so jobs that are created in cement manufacturing industry to on the back of this protectionism, you could be sacrificing tens of thousands of jobs in the construction industry. Those people that would have otherwise built houses that would have been viable, which aren't viable. Those houses which only get half the way that they're supposed to because people run out of money and can't finish them. And so they don't do the second part of the building. And I think that's the big challenge for people who are advocating for trade, is people don't see those jobs. They're jobs that could have been. They're not jobs that are in front of you now. And people will always be biased to protect. This is where fear comes in, right? You'd rather protect the little that you have rather than to gamble it for something that could be bigger in the future. And it's a sort of human tendency that we all have built in to varying degrees. So that's a couple of reflections from the Nigeria market. How does that sound to you, as a young Nigerian? Does that sound something relatable, or does it sound like I'm talking nonsense, or what?
I think it's really eye-opening, because it was Chimamanda Adichie, another Nigerian, that said the danger of a one-sided story. And just as you said, President Goodluck Jonathan going to that factory and saying, wow, things are really working out. And in many senses, they are, but understanding that that's just one side of it. And then to hear you explain and break down and say, this is the opportunity cost of a couple thousand of workers, is 10,000 of other workers that could be in the construction company. But as you said, it's a human tendency. Let's focus on the now. And then when tomorrow comes, it's everybody's scrapping around and wondering, okay, what next to do? So as a young Nigerian, I think it's really eye-opening that, oh wow, I didn't know that. And if I listen to mainstream media, I'd be like, oh my God, all of you move away from our country. No, we don't want to export, we don't want to import. But hearing how it is, hearing the breakdown of it economically is really eye-opening. And I think it's a call for more reforms and more evidence. That's what I would say. What does the evidence say? That's what we need to be following in times like this.
Yeah, that's right. And when Dr. Manzoor Ahmad was talking about the automobile industry in Pakistan, there are a lot of parallels with the Nigerian car industry as well, because, again, Nigeria pursued a policy of saying it was going to put restrictions on car imports, whether that's tariffs or whether that's just bans of vehicles coming in. We all know there's a vibrant black market for vehicles that are imported that come in. I think it used to be from Cotonou. I don't know if that's still a large entry point for vehicles from the States and other countries which are coming in secondhand or whatever. But largely the policy was they wanted the big car manufacturers to invest in Nigeria to assemble the cars. And because of that, they considered that they would have these high value jobs that would be located in country in Nigeria. And so the companies comply. You have Hyundai, Toyota, Peugeot was one of the very early ones, right? With a big car manufacturing plant in Kaduna. And they do the assembly. But the challenge is they do it as a way to access the big market. They don't do it with their heart and soul. So what they do is they do the minimum that's required in order to be able to have a stamp of a made in Nigeria car. And even if it's just literally everything is, the majority of things are imported, and it's just the last welds that are put on in the factories or whatever. And again, the politicians tour these plants and they say, wow, this is amazing. Look at this. We're doing so well. We have these car manufacturing industry and it's seen as a thing of national pride that this is the kind of, but in a sense you say, right, well, how many jobs have you created here? Like for a country of 200 million people, how many jobs? Is it just a handful of jobs? And what value added are these jobs doing? Are they just doing something which is purely the minimum required to get around the import restrictions, and then actually everything else is being done in countries with more efficient manufacturing production facilities and all the rest, and just it's being imported into the country? Like, is the prize worth having, and what would the better prize be? And I think this is the nuance here. So if we go back to the concept of flywheel economics, we're looking at economies as ecosystems, and we're trying to get sort of plants that flourish, plants that do well, fruit giving, like productive plants in our garden here or in our ecosystem. And, of course, with a lot of effort, I can try and grow a banana tree in the southwest of the UK, but it's going to struggle. It's not the right climate for it. It's not maybe the right choice. Maybe I can try and put it in a big greenhouse, and maybe I can go to lots of effort to try and do it. But is it worth going for that? Or is it worth going for something which is a bit more suited to the climate which I've got? Maybe an apple tree, a pear tree, plum, one of the more sort of local varieties, and something where it can sit very naturally in the environment which I've got, and it can flourish and it can do well without having to do all that very heavy lifting, artificial, trying to keep it on life support all the time. And I think that's the sort of the intelligent stewardship that we're looking for in our economies, is people not just saying, well, this country has a car industry, so I want a car industry, or this country has textiles, so I want textiles. Or, just in the same, we go back to those Chinese memes of American workers in sweatshops, right? What's the prize that you want for your country? What fits your country, what suits your country, and don't be trying to get that prize that doesn't suit your country. Like this whole thing with Nigeria wanting toothpicks. Is that really the prize you want? Do you want to be the country that the world's greatest exporter and self-sufficient producer of toothpicks? Because that's not a very good prize to have, to be honest. I mean, no disrespect to the toothpick manufacturers, but that should not be the basis of a national industrialization strategy. Neither should cars, to be honest, in terms of going through that kind of way. It's really about giving thought to what are those things in the value chains that add value, that take you to that next stage of development, that create higher income type jobs, and where there truly is a value to be added. So a lot of the time when I was near the tail end of my time in Nigeria, we were looking at things like, so food processing. So there is cocoa production in Nigeria, right? I mean, not be as extensive as in Ghana and some other West African countries, but the climate in Nigeria is very well suited to cocoa production. And there are some sort of the parts just in the southwest of the country where cocoa production is going on still, and some better than others. Some of it is a bit goes back quite a long way. But why shouldn't Nigeria be also producing chocolate? Why shouldn't it be producing things which are high value added, high end chocolate? Companies like Losh's Chocolates, a few others were starting to do that. Boutique chocolate that is of standard that could be exported to countries, much more value added, much more premium to be added to that than just exporting the cocoa beans. Why are we not looking at the kind of the obvious next steps and some of the things that are growing organically in the country anyway, and not trying to and thinking of ways to enhance that and to enable entrepreneurs to go the next step in all of that? And for me, that's a much more productive route than just trying to second guess something, and me trying to grow a banana tree in my garden in the southwest of the UK. I can try that, but it's not worth the effort that it would take in order to pull it off, because it's not situated in the ecosystem. So it's working out what are the prizes worth having, and then investing to support those areas as well. Any final thoughts from you, Favour, before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think I would just want to pick up from what you said about the question: is the prize worth having, and what could the better prize be? I think that's so profound. Actually, it's really, really profound. And you're an economist yourself, and I remember Dr. Manzoor saying that economists never agree, but one thing that they do agree on is that tariffs hurt the global economy. and the country itself. And that was for me, it's something we need to think about. If all people that don't normally agree are, at least majority of them are saying, no, we don't think this is a good idea, it might be something worth taking a second look at. And I think my final takeaway is that in circumstances like this, just what is going on in the global economy, what is going on in our individual economies, both Nigeria, Pakistan, and globally, is that circumstances like this give rise, there are opportunities for countries to be able to take a look and make progress in their own tariff reforms. Dr. Manzoor cited the example of Chile and where they were and where they are now. And I'm like, okay, this is an opportunity for everybody. But, that's the thing about opportunities. They are called opportunities for a reason. You have to be the one to take the proactive step. And not just for Nigeria, even for America, they're standing at the junction in history now, and history will remember the decisions that we take, and they are going to reverberate. And so it's really a matter of what are we going to do with what is in our hands. We have to go beyond what is in front of us and really begin to think as much as we can, project into the future and say, what are the decisions that we need to take? So yeah, is the price worth having, and what could the better price be? I think that's really profound, and it's something I'm taking away from this episode.
Well, look, I'm really pleased we've been able to cover trade and look at the I guess the potential benefits of trade, right? But what, it's coming in the context of what looks like a relatively bleak period for global trade going forward. One advantage, and I guess we covered this a little bit with Dr. Manzoor, is just that perhaps the advantage of the world's richest economy deciding to really increase tariffs on, with so many countries around the world, is that it brings into sharp focus the downsides of when trade is not available. And I don't think you get that when a lot of other countries ramp up tariffs, because it's not as high profile. You don't have the Donald Trump, what's that? The celebrity of Donald Trump, the global celebrity that he is, drawing attention to that, whether that's through the sort of the memes that ridicule it, or whether it's the questions that are asked, or people internalizing the impact of what that will mean in terms of jobs and prosperity going forward. So I think perhaps one of the good things is that will come out of this unintendedly is that it may draw attention to why trade is valuable in the first place and bring that back. And hopefully Dr. Manzoor is right in terms of that will be a lot less controversial than it may have otherwise have been. So thank you so much, Favor, again. I think it's been fascinating to have Dr. Manzoor Ahmad on the podcast. Let me hand over to you to wrap things up.
Yes, quite a fascinating episode. Lots of things to take away. Thank you once again, Dr. Manzoor, for coming on the show. It was really, as I said, eye-opening. And thank you to our dear listeners. We hope you enjoyed the episode as much as we did making it. So that's all for today. And don't forget that you can always share your thoughts with us across all our social media platforms. We're on X, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Our handle is Flywheel Economics. And also, you can continue this journey of insightful topics with us on our website at flywheeleconomics.com. Until next time, this has been the Flywheel Economics Podcast.